Hello, viewers. Today we have Professor Rosemary Savija. She is a professor in the Department of English at the University of Nagaland. And I'm very happy that she's here today. And we'll talk about the status of Naga women, social status of Naga women, and a lot of issues related to women reservation in the ULB elections and, so on. And she is also the advisor for the Naga Mothers Association, and she has associated with the NMA for quite several years. And also, she's also one of the petitioners in the Supreme Court regarding with regards to the reservation 33% seats reservation for women in Nagaland for the ULB election. So there cannot be any better time to have a conversation like this on the women issue, especially the reservation issue, with the person who has worked day and night for this issue. And I'm very, very happy that she agrees to come and have a talk like this. And I hope we, walk away with a lot of learnings and insights. And, I hope our experience and conversation here will provoke us to give thoughts on many issues and many aspects of this very, very matter. So thank you so much, Professor. And, we have been planning to have this conversation for the last 1 year.
Yes.
And like you said, the opportune time is here right now.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you are here.
Thank you for inviting.
Wonderful. Since, we also know, we know that the Nagaland Legislative Assembly has finally repealed and introduced a bill which has now allowed the 33% seat reservation for women in the upcoming ULB election. And you being one of, being the petitioner in the Guwahati High Court as well as in the Supreme Court, how do you feel at this moment? Are you glad, or is there something that still holds you back?
No. I think I speak on behalf of all the Naga women in the state. It's an elative moment. We are happy elections are going to happen, particularly in June, which is just the very next month. It's been a long struggle. And I think we're happy. We have a gender-sensitive government finally able to have the courage, legislators who are willing to really overcome the regressive mindsets that have actually held us back. And I think it's a happy occasion for many, many of our women. There are many of them, many of the younger women who are actually preparing now to step into the elections. Oh. In all these 3 municipals and 36 towns in Nagaland. So I think we are going to see a lot of active women coming into the, coming into the action in all our towns.
I personally can't wait to see and observe that. I think this is going to make history in the state of Nagaland,
definitely,
right?
Definitely.
So how was your experience? You've been fighting for this. So what the first thing that you did, as part of the Naga Mothers Association also, you took this matter in the Guwahati High Court for the first time.
You see, when the Nagaland government amended the first amendment of the Municipal Act, they amended it with women reservation. So you can imagine the excitement of Naga women. Yes. We got together, we waited and waited and waited, and then elections were not held. So in May 2011, the huge delegation of Naga women from all the tribes, from all the tribe women's organizations, including the Naga Mothers, we went and visited the then Chief Minister, Mr. Rio, and called on him. And we actually handed over a deadline of 1 month for municipal elections to be held. And he was courteous enough, but he said, all these tribal bodies are sitting on top of my head. I would suggest that you all approach the court.
Wow.
And when you have a government that is actually not ready to implement, but suggests us to go to the court, by then we also, there's so many women activists. The State Women Commission also was backing us. All of us decided it's high time then we moved the court. And that was the reason why we formed a joint action committee. All the Naga tribe women's organizations formed a joint action committee. And it was there that it was decided that Naga Mothers would be the petitioner. So the petitioners was, it landed on my head as the advisor of the NMA and on the president of the Naga Mothers Association. So two of us were the petitioners.
So this is not, that was not from your personal capacity.
No.
Representing the NMA.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And what was the judgment given by the Guwahati High Court? Kohima bench, isn't it?
Oh, it's so long ago. In a few months of hearing, the Guwahati High Court Kohima bench made it very clear that elections have to be held. And you can again imagine the excitement of the women, hundreds of us thronged the Guwahati High Court in Kohima, and all the lawyers were so shocked to see all the mothers, flooding their benches. We didn't even know which bench was for the lawyers and which was actually meant for outsiders. We started sitting even in the benches of all the lawyers, and we were excited with the first judgment that was given, and that was to hold the elections. However, with the pressure that the government was having, the government took us to the division bench in Guwahati. In Guwahati itself. Wow. And so when you are dragged to a division bench, we had no option but to follow again, So around 30 of us from different women's organizations, we spent quite a lot of time in Guwahati. I think on 3 occasions, 3 hearings in Guwahati, where again the argument started, The Advocate General was actually warning, there'll be bloodshed, there'll be this and there'll be that, So all these came up. And when we found that the government was actually trying, the assembly, they were actually planning to take back to the assembly and repeal this act which they had passed, we approached the Supreme Court. On the advice of our lawyer, we approached the Supreme Court. So that was when the special leave petition was filed in the Supreme Court. And it took us till 2017.
Wow.
Imagine.
Wow. Actually, the amendment made for women reservation was made in 2006, right?
Yeah.
An election was supposed to be conducted by
2008, 9, 10. Yeah.
But it was not.
No.
And why was it? It was just because of the opposition from the tribal bodies?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I mean, what was their problem? Like, Article 371A is what they mentioned, but how does that violate or infringe?
For someone who's brought up from the village like me, and I've had very open-minded village leaders, men who really don't have problems with women leading and coming in, and for someone who's also been the president of the gazetted officers in my village, I for one failed to understand why there was so much of resistance against women coming in to clean your towns, to fix your prices of your vegetables. And, that's what a municipality and town is all about. Market prices, cleaning, cleanliness, sanitation, water, So I think there was a communication gap, in our leaders not understanding what the municipality entailed, and also for the town, what actually was to be done in the towns. And the very fact that, of course, we are a strong patriarchal society, I think it all ends up with, that kind of, drumming up of emotions, beware of women, and the kind of names that we have been called, are names that we have never even heard earlier, Western educated ones, and, these leftists, communists, and, things that you do not even expect to be named, were all the names that we went through.
I mean, but the fact remains here that it doesn't come from you all. No. It's our constitutional right.
Yes.
It's a provision made by the 74th Amendment.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to understand here, I don't understand is there is a reservation for women in the village development board at the village level, where customary laws should be actually prevailing.
Exactly. And I think that was one of our main arguments in court, that in 1980, the Nagaland Village Development Board model rules was framed in 1980.
Yes.
And since then, we've had 1/4 of seats reserved for women in every village. And at that point of time, it was around 1,200 villages when we went to court. And now I think you almost have 2,000 villages in Nagaland that actually have women reserved seats there. And they are members of the VDP. And no problems in the village. So who really has the problem with women in our towns is the question, you know. It's not the villagers, actually. It's not the village people who are the key influencers of these riots and the movement and the protests. I think it's something much larger and much more serious, you know, of what really is a problem in the society. I think it's a lot to do with that.
True. I mean, in urban areas, at least there is a mixture of communities.
Yeah.
So when it comes to Naga customary laws also, it's very vague. We don't have a codified laws. So applying like which tribe's laws, I mean, every tribe has different type of customary practices. And, you know, as ordinary as I am in legally this, I fail to understand that. However, that's not the topic for now. But I want to understand, after that, you also went to the Supreme Court, I mean, as a representative of the Naga Mothers Association. What prompted you all to go to Supreme Court?
You see, our lawyer, on reading the arguments and on listening to arguments, what was happening in Guwahati, at the division bench, realized that the government actually was not going to implement it, but they were actually trying to repeal it. And it was, I think, a good move for the Naga Mothers and for the Joint Action Committee. We went as the Joint Action Committee, JACWR. For years, this JACWR survived with presidents of all the tribe women's organizations. And I think it was one of the strongest forums that we had then, And we approached the Supreme Court in 2012-13. So that went on, the case went on, and immediately when we filed the petition there in the Supreme Court, the Nagaland Assembly passed a resolution repealing the act. So that was where it all came, and therefore the second part of our petition, we had to challenge the repeal of the act. Could something that was passed and which is a part of the Constitution, the 74th Amendment, could something like that be repealed by an assembly?
Right, of course.
Were actually very valid legal things that were thrown up there in the Supreme Court. And sometimes it was quite embarrassing sitting there. And the petitioners and us, our organization too, we never missed a single hearing in all the years that that followed. And sometimes it was so embarrassing listening to the discussions that the government advocate general put before the Supreme Court. So to legal minds, we were literally battling with, customs, traditions, things that actually do not come into the town. A lot of those excuses came up. But I think the good point is that in 2017, on the 26th, I still remember it was Republic Day. And the Chief Minister called us, invited us, and then said that they are going to hold the elections in February. That's 26th January. And that would we kindly withdraw the petition up there. The women took a firm decision, and they said that if the Chief Minister gives in written, and by then it was Mr. T.R. Ziliang.
Right.
So if the Chief Minister is willing to give in written, we would send our representatives to go and withdraw as petitioners, So that was the decision we took. 26th, the Chief Minister gave in written that in February they would be holding the elections as scheduled. And we said, okay, in good faith, why hang on and have everyone jumping on our heads like this all the time? For no fault of ours. So on the 27th we went, on the 29th we filed a petition, withdrawing as petitioners. And the problem that we faced is because it was a public policy case and very well publicized, the lawyer was in 2 months as to how he would withdraw the case without us all getting punished. The Supreme Court also punishes people who just goes and flaunts themselves in front of the Supreme Court and comes back.
For wasting their time.
Oh, yes. So that was the biggest fear he had. Anyway, we said beyond circumstances beyond our control, and as elections are going to be held, we are withdrawing as petitioners. So we withdrew as petitioners, hoping that the Supreme Court would understand and elections would be held. But what happened was the riots that happened, the burning of the offices in Kohima. From Delhi, we couldn't come down. Our families were very worried for our security. We had threat calls. We had people who threatened to burn up my house, and things unimaginable. And so we decided we come back, through another route, and that's how we came back. We finally reached Nagaland, and by then, you had the Chief Minister who had to step down. You had another Chief Minister who had to come up. You had the two unfortunate deaths of the two young men down there in Dimapur. And with all these things that happened, even though we withdrew as petitioners, we realized it was actually just, so much of political games also that were, embedded in this question of women reservation.
So in the 2011, the 12th resolution taken by Nagaland Assembly was, I think, related to relaxation of clause 243T about the reservation
yes.
be not, like imposed upon Nagaland. But that is something that cannot be done. Just
It
for
is
the
a part of the 74th Amendment,
Right,
no?
right.
It has become a part of the Constitution, and it's a constitutional right of women. And it's not only Naga women, it's women in Nagaland. That's a difference, no? And so it's been such a long legal battle. After we stepped down, the lawyer, Dr. Colin Gonsalves, who's also from a human rights organization, he's the director of the Human Rights Law Network, he got in touch with his own partner organizations of human rights defenders in India, the People's Union for Civil Liberties, PUCL. And that was how the PUCL came into the picture. He somehow convinced them to be the petitioners after we withdrew. And some months later, I think the case came up. The government, our state government, agreed to the PUCL to be petitioners. And that's why from 2017 till this year, the case continued.
Wow.
Imagine. It ended up with a contempt petition filed by the PUCL. And in the process, of course, they have been targeting the Naga mothers. They have, has done a lot of things against the organization, defamed us, literally harassed us on many occasions. And I think that's the price of what we had paid for this very important constitutional right of, Naga women. And we are glad all that is over. The elections are announced.
Yeah.
The state election has already put out its schedule. And we are hoping everyone will come together. And, having municipal elections would mean our men also coming in, helped by the women, and it would definitely mean cleaner towns, better administered towns, development of our cities. We are still way behind, more than 21 years, we are way behind other municipalities, even the capital and Dimapur and Mochung for that matter. So I hope, this will be the start of something new.
Very much looking forward to that. And I think I kind of really commend your courage. I mean, in the midst of that life-threatening moments. I mean, something personal, a kind of a personal question. Were not you scared, or were not you worried about your life as well as someone?
I was more worried for my children, because I have children. Many people think, I live by myself and I enjoy myself. No, I'm also a mother. Yeah. I'm also a grandmother. And these are parts of my life people don't understand at all, But fortunately, I always say we go back to our village, no matter what. In our Angami custom also, it's not your tribe that defines you or describes you or takes actions on you. It is your village. And I was fortunate, I come from one of the biggest villages here. I come from Kohima village. Okay. I have clansmen who are well educated. I have Khel leaders who are very supportive of women's empowering policies. We also have, village leaders, educated village leaders who are actually very, very sensitive towards women's rights. And therefore, many of them stood behind us, those of us who were harassed and identified, by the tribe. And, they even forced us to step down from the Naga Mothers organization, which we refused. When men can be members of different organizations and clubs, what makes it mandatory that women, and especially, vocal women like myself or the present president of the Naga Mothers, why should we step down from an organization that has worked only for women's rights, that have worked for peace, that have worked to rehabilitate drug addicts and HIV/AIDS patients? These are the things that the Naga Mothers has done. It's not like any other organization, So we were very clear we do not want to step down from the Naga Mothers. And I think that was where the, the clash of egos also started. But I think our strength, I would definitely credit it to our brothers, our families that stood behind us. My own children that stood behind me, believing that we are doing something good. I think that's more important than anything else.
I mean, it came like a breath of fresh air to learn that even there are a lot of menfolk who support you.
Of course. And now that elections have been announced, you'll be surprised. Our men are also really thinking of efficient women to step into either the municipality or the towns. They themselves are, inviting women, who they think are educated and can come in and take charge, So there are a lot of developments that are going on, and it's so good to know that these kind of developments are now taking place after the battle, And so it shows that people have understood, and hopefully the days ahead we will see definitely a very good team of women coming in all the towns in Nagaland. And I think that's the most exciting part of it.
And as someone who has championed this cause, fighting for women's rights, I mean, when you look at the Indian society in general, I mean, like that side, excluding Nagaland, Naga women, there is a general belief that Naga women enjoy better status than the other part of the country, which somehow, I would also believe in that. And there are menfolk who would say that, therefore, they don't need reservation. If they want to fight, they can fight like the men themselves. So, in the midst of that argument, how would you like to justify the need for a reservation, or was it just because is it mandated by constitution, or there is a rationale behind?
Of course, there is a rationale behind it, and the reason why Naga women have come forward claiming their rights. One is because the government itself has passed the act, and therefore given us the act on a plate. So which woman is going to say, no, I don't want to be empowered? Definitely. Political empowerment is something that's very important. But you see, the real picture of our society is very different. For me, because I'm a gender consultant, gender expert on many bodies, we have to understand that, as I said earlier, our society is strongly patriarchal.
Yeah.
And therefore, this structured society goes down right deep into our roots and into our culture. And any woman that goes against it is identified as someone who's not good, as a loose woman, as this and that. And I think it still persists, and therefore, Naga women have remained silent for so long, I think, till the Naga mothers gathered the women, tribe women together, and then we started articulating for our rights. And that shows that there is something deeply embedded within our own society which does not allow women their rights. Women do not have ancestral properties. You have Indian women, the Hindu Succession Act, the Muslim Personal Law. It allows women, daughters, wives to inherit. We don't have. We have no access to ancestral property, but we are fortunate that we have many daughters who are given acquired property. But then what percentage? How many Naga women really have access to these kind of properties? There is feminization of poverty, in our state. Definitely. Who are the poor ones? It's the women. The markets are flooded with the women. But where does this income go? Back to their homes, to their husbands, to their families, They do not own that kind of a property. I think the main argument in the municipality has been ownership of land. Women not owning land. But we must realize times are changing. There are many women who own land in towns, many women also who own land in villages. And these are acquired property lands, not ancestral. No ancestral land, and therefore I think the smart thing that which many Naga women are doing now after the movement is that we need to buy land. So any land that's available, I think there is a lot of buying of land. If you look at the statistics, it's very interesting how much of land is being actually bought by women. But if we compare ourselves with the rest of India, we're still way, way down. In terms of crimes, we still have very serious concerns. In terms of inheritance, we absolutely don't have anything. In terms of right to, many other access to many other rights and facilities, we are still there. Where we are. So there is a great need for women to actually come into leadership. Look at the assembly. We've just last year elected 2 women after I don't know how many years of statehood. And I think these are very, very important pointers as to what is ailing our society. It's not that men do not understand; they do, but I think we are being moved on and spurred on by a totally different thinking. Group of people, rather than people who are more gender sensitive, who love their daughters and who think for their wives and for their mothers and for their children. So leaving aside anything else, I think Naga women actually need to be empowered much, much more then what is happening in the rest of the world? When I listen to stories from Afghanistan, because I worked with a UNIFEM for many years as one of their advisory board members, when you listen to stories from Afghanistan and the Taliban, it is like listening to stories about what we have gone through and what Naga women have gone through. And in many places are still going through.
Okay.
So I think
Okay.
these are very serious things.
So you have also just talked about the inheritance rights for women. This is also a very controversial, point of discussion. I mean, if a family gives birth to a daughter, I mean, sometimes we also think what stops them from inheriting the property in the absence of a male child. So someone else who has no relation at all will come and grab it. I mean, that doesn't make sense because we have to consider a daughter as well as the sons, I mean, as part of the family. But that doesn't exist in our case. But that would not apply to, I mean, a daughter getting married off to a non-Naga, for example. How would you like to compare these two?
Yeah, you see, I think the difference with our Naga attitude towards daughters, we claim we love them and we pile all our love on them, I suppose, in many ways. But we do not understand that even for a young girl and for a woman who will grow up into a woman, the importance of land and property, security, which actually roots her to the place where she is born. And I think these are issues that we are still grappling with. And in the other case, when a woman is married to a non-Naga, for example, maybe married to an Indian, maybe married to a foreigner, all these issues are not there because when, for example, the husband dies, as per Hindu law or even Muslim, even if she's married to a Muslim, as per Muslim personal law, the wife and the daughter will inherit his property, especially if he doesn't have sons. Whereas here, in the context of Nagas, when you don't have a son and you have just a daughter, then your family property and the house in which they are living, will be inherited by the nearest male relative. And our biggest worry, I think, as women activists, is the future of the wife and the daughter who are living in the family home. Their lives will depend on the generosity of that stranger who's actually some few cousins away, cousins away, who will come and inherit the whole family property. And I think when we talk of customary laws, now the government is talking about codifying. Codification is something I will not recommend.
Okay.
I do not. I would think of a written, customary laws are important. Customary laws are important to be written down because of the fact that we seem to be selectively interpreting our oral laws in many cases, and therefore it's important to have written customary laws. But to codify it, all our tribes are different.
Yes.
Laws, even on the same case, laws differ from village to village also.
Exactly.
Sometimes even from Khel to Khel also. And therefore we will create again another big battle among ourselves once we codify. How will we actually follow each other's law? Yeah. Angamis and Semas or Angamis and Konyaks, We all have very different customary laws, and therefore it's ideal to think we can codify. But way back as 2005-06, when we were already discussing codification, the idea of codification of customary laws in Mumbai, I'd gone for a conference there.
Okay.
Even as early as that, we were still analyzing, would it really help tribal women? Because to a large extent, maybe if we are looking at the legal system and the rights, but at the same time, will your tribe allow, will your village allow to codify, and especially in relation to marriage, inheritance. These are what codification is all about. And so we have a lot of homework to do, actually.
Right. Then what would be the alternative? Like, suppose if we don't codify it at the expense of power or something, people can misinterpret it any day, like with the passage of time?
Nagas seem to think that customary laws cannot change.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it should. It should, because culture is not static.
True.
Okay.
True.
And so with the changing times, definitely customary laws can be amended.
That's nice.
I am looking at amendments, okay, which are more gender sensitive, which are more sensitive to what the tribe or the society needs, and these are changes that are doable, okay, in connection with in relation with the village leaders and the tribe leaders. No, these are things that they can do. There was a time when land was forbidden to be sold, isn't it?
Okay.
Land of our ancestors, land of our areas were forbidden. And now we are selling always to the highest bidder, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Every morning you open the newspaper, land is being sold every day.
Yeah.
Any Naga woman can go and buy acres and acres of land.
Yeah, I think women are buying as well.
And that's my favorite column. I don't know why. I don't have the money, but I love looking at the land column, and I think, how much of land is actually being sold. And how do you know that it's only being sold to Nagas?
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah, absolutely.
There are many, many in between, even outsiders who have come and managed to buy a lot of our land. And therefore, these are actually against all the customary traditions that we hold dear. So when I talk of selective interpretation of customary laws, a lot of things like this really needs to be studied. And at this point in time, educated people, especially educated younger people, really need to research more into possibilities of such things happening, and I think that's the way forward.
I mean, totally agree with you. Time is changing, and people are changing, and our thoughts. We can't be that secluded Naga tribe away from the world. Like we have to adapt to the changing norms of the world. But of course, without totally ignoring the root where we come from.
Definitely,
right?
the vibrancy of our culture,
Exactly.
the richness that we have.
Yes.
Which can never be found anywhere else in the world. And I think those are things that we treasure. But on issues that hinder development of the society, the tribe, women, maybe children too, whatever, and the younger generation, I think it's time that we had a relook at what customary laws and traditions really mean to us.
And on the new bill for the Nagaland Municipal Act, I want to come back to that. It's about reservation for women is already there, but not reservation for women for the chairperson's office. So, I mean, that is also another thing to look into.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
You see, the act, when it was first drafted, is like any other municipal act in the country, because it's a part of the constitution, which reserves seats not only for women as members, but also reserves 1/3 of seats of chairpersons for women. You see, the funny thing is that our men are so courteous. They will talk so much behind your back, but I think very few want to talk in your face, And that is why for a long time we did not realize that there was so much of objection against the post of a chairperson, a woman chairperson. And I think it was only when this time they amended the act and deleted the post of the chairperson, which is quite a lot. 1/3 of the chairpersons in the state is quite a lot. And that really made us realize, this was also something that they objected so much to, women coming and sitting on the chair. On this particular issue, we have not raised our objection. We have not raised our objection because, frankly, we feel let elections be held. It is more important for women to come and step in and show what you can do. That is one. Secondly, the chairperson is always selected from the elected councillors. Okay? So if you're capable, if you're articulate, if you do good for your colony, and if you're popular also with the elected council members, they themselves will elect you, as chairperson. And I think that's what we need to look forward to. And therefore, first step first.
Makes sense. I mean, totally makes sense. What you want is let the entry be done first. And after that, whoever is capable, they will definitely get to the position.
Definitely, we may even, and I think the good thing that I'm excited about, and many of my friends are also excited about, is in many of the towns, you're having women contesting in open seats too. Not only in women reserved seats, but in open seats. And these are very good indications that Naga women are ready. And I think, I hope society really welcomes these kind of developments that are going to happen.
And as someone who has been fervently fighting for women's rights, I mean, what is your end goal that you want to? Is it because I hope you are not planning to contest? A personal question. If you're not planning, then what is it that you want, that you are at the risk of your life fighting for this issue?
See, I'm not someone new to women's issues. Most people do not realize. I've been an expert member of the National Commission in Delhi for many, many years.
I see.
I've been on the advisory board of UNIFEM for 4 countries for many years. And therefore, what do we talk about? We talk about women's equity, we talk about women's status, we talk about empowering women. I've been the director of Women's Studies Center in the university. So these are issues that are close to my heart. And when you get an opportunity that Naga women need to step in, we need to have a collective, we need to raise our voices. I think that was the main persuasion that really made me come out and have all our women march forward together. And it's collective effort. It's just not me or the other petitioner. It's actually the support. You will not imagine the kind of support that the tribe women have given. One of the tribe women leaders, the Angami president, former president, is now a minister, who was very closely a part of the women reservation. So these are very, very strong indications that changes will happen. And I think, no, I'm not planning to come in for any kind of elections. I think over the years, there's been lots of offers from different political parties to step in. I don't think politics is my line. I'm purely an academic. And I think that's where my excitement comes from, to analyze, to critique, to study, whatever I see around me. Definitely not into municipal elections. Our job now is to encourage capable young women to step in. And I see more of younger women coming in. And I think Naga society, there's something that we need to always focus on, encouraging the younger generation and grooming the second rung leaders. It's time, and it's something that we all, I think, in all forums really need to look forward to and really need to do. And start writing now. Because all these years I've sacrificed so much of time and not been able to write. Now many people may find themselves in my books because that's what I plan to do. Do a lot of writing, hopefully.
It'll be nice to document all your experience and
I think
much you have experienced.
It's important. So that's something we are looking forward to. We hope to come out at least with some publications and give clarity. Because of the fact that we have been too busy struggling
I can imagine.
and unable to, really put it down to paper. The amount of researchers, the amount of journalists, the amount of people who have come and sought interviews and records, and we have helped as much as possible. But it's nothing like us sitting down to write. And I hope that's something that I can give my time to after me.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, this is definitely, time for bearing fruits of all your efforts. I mean, had there been no resistance from a women group like yours, definitely everyone will just go ahead and only the Supreme Court would not have taken a suo motu case on this if there were no petitioners challenging on this issue. Exactly. Right? Because Supreme Court has too many things to do. So I'm really happy and excited. I mean, I'm grateful to you also and your team that you all were taking this initiative. And I, for one, support women empowerment.
Are you married?
I'm not.
Good.
Yeah. But the thing is, we are not talking about women empowerment for other women. We are talking about women empowerment for our own sisters, for our own mothers.
Our homes.
Yeah. And why wouldn't I support about it? I mean, but when we start talking about women empowerment, people will just perceive it as radical feminism that want to fight against the menfolk in our society, which is, I believe, not.
Not at all. All these years I've worked with men. I've worked in organizations that are more of men than women. I've led teachers in the university where we have more of male teachers than women, So all these kind of assumptions about petitioners and about women leaders and all those women. And I remember, I was very, it's been very, a lot of ridiculous incidents and funny moments for us also. We woke up one day when an Australian journalist came over to write an article, and we found that one of our own younger boys had told the journalist that women reservation is for divorcees and spinsters. and we thought, if that is the understanding that we have about empowering our women, then where do we go? Where do we head to,
Yeah.
But I think over the years, that particular young man has been one of our biggest supporters.
Wow.
I remember one Christmas, he brought such a big chicken to my house. I forgave him for that comment. And I think over the years, people have understood, that in the long run, this is something that a state needs to open up to. And we are grateful for that. We're really grateful.
And do you think with this kind of reservation now, will it go on forever?
No.
Or do you think there should be a specified time period?
It need not go on forever. If everyone wants it to go on forever, why not? Because the Constitution does not mention even time.
Yeah.
But many of the people who are going to implement it are hoping it'll be maybe after the cycles of reservations are over in the particular towns. No matter what, I think by then our women will be trained. They will have enough, experience also, and will already have a cycle of leaders who will go on. But that cannot be said, because this is an act, and the act at no point of time talks about a period of reservation. And my question always is, what about reservation in Nagaland? Okay, for the scheduled tribes. Okay, for the backward tribes.
Okay.
How long do we want it? For a specific time, for a cycle?
Yeah.
I think, we also need to understand how our women have struggled and why it is important for our daughters, for our children, for our wives, for our mothers to actually have that kind of space, even in having a voice in the towns. This is basically to do with the towns. And at this point in time, Naga women, throughout the whole struggle, have not asked for reservation in assemblies, because India hasn't even reached that yet.
Yeah, true.
One day, if it happens, what's going to happen then? I think all the women will be chased out of the state.
I hope such times don't come, so that we all live in peace and
yes,
harmony.
Definitely. Just my twisted sense of humor.
I can get that. So definitely, yes. I mean, there is. I mean, one fact that we all would agree on is that there's a need, acute need for Naga women to represent in our decision-making body.
Yes.
Imagine director of a department. If there is a woman in the department in any government department, sometimes there are directors, as a woman.
Yes.
And nobody questions that.
Exactly.
Then why would we question about women being elected and leading us as a chairperson? So
in a town.
Yes, it's quite oxymoronic, in a sense sometimes.
I fail to understand, and I've stopped trying to understand also because, our idea was let the law take its course. We've withdrawn as petitioners. If one day the Supreme Court finds it good enough to, end the case, let it end. But for us, with so many years of harassment and defamation and threats and, the kind of things that our families also have gone through, I think is something I really don't want my children again to go through.
I can imagine. I mean, threat is real.
Yeah, of course.
It gives you sleepless nights.
Of course.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So I think, but for the right cause, you are doing that. And I think tomorrow all the women or Naga society as a whole will realize, I hope, and be grateful for all the efforts that your team has been on. And you mentioned
we
something.
We have a good team, a strong team.
Wonderful. I mean, without team, this cannot be done.
It's a collective effort.
True.
And we still keep in touch with everyone.
Okay.
Many of our tribe leaders may be thinking, we have destroyed all of them, this has happened, that has happened. Women's strength and women's collective is very different. In times of need, in times of trouble, in times of, in times when we need each other. I think across the years, we have not lost touch with all the tribe women's organizations, and we support each other in times of, when there are voices to be raised in times of crimes. Look at the Oting massacre.
Absolutely.
We again met up, we again joined forces, we marched to the Raj Bhavan, so women's collective actually is something that sustains a society, and I think this is something we really need to understand. Even our children, for that matter, they really need to understand the role that mothers play.
Absolutely. And we can't just rub off the role that the Naga mothers have played in the climax of Naga insurgency and conflict with the Indian armed forces.
Yes.
Without women, I don't think Naga movement would even survive as in that sense.
You see, the saddest thing is that, the contributions of women, of our grandmothers joining the forces, the struggle then, nothing is documented. What is documented in our history is the rapes, the crimes that were committed on our women, and nothing much on how they also trekked with our men, held guns, walked in the jungles, camped in the jungles, and the kind of struggles that they also went through. Until today, the kind of struggle that they also go through in the armed struggle that we have, not much of it is documented because we are too busy glorifying, our men and our brave, young
warriors.
people and warriors, and our folk songs also. It comes a lot. That's why I say it comes a lot from our culture. The fact that we have a culture that glorifies our men, and women are supposed to be docile, good wives, cook well, and look after the home. And I think these barriers have been broken. Times have changed. And that is the reason why we are giving that kind of freedom to our daughters, isn't it? Sending them to the best educational institutes, giving them the best options to have a career and a choice for themselves. And therefore, my question is always, who sits then in our society and passes these kind of judgments that women cannot come in? They must. And times will change.
And as someone who is an academic, now do you see more women in the higher education and men? How do you want to explain that?
I think it's a lot to do again with our culture. You must remember that right from childhood, the girl is told, that is for your brother. You want to eat that part, that is for your brother. You can have the other part of the chicken, Read Istarini Ralu's novel, you will know that the thigh was always kept for the brother, and the sister can eat something else,
Okay.
So right from childhood, even we, for that matter, I grew up in a home where my mother was a typical Angami mother, okay? Girls must learn to wash, sweep, love your brothers, wash your brothers' clothes, And so my brothers enjoyed themselves, and I have a lot of brothers, so they enjoyed themselves, went to the best schools, but I too went to the best schools because I had a very progressive father.
I see.
Okay, so I think the culture itself actually grooms our girls to be tough, and to sustain themselves and to survive. And I think it's these kind of tactics where you need to work but also study. You need to carry your siblings in the evening, but also read. Okay, so all these kind of culture which is ingrained in you comes to your help even in education, and that's why I get excited when I see so much of girls in the university. In a department like mine, which is English, which is a forte of most girl students. We always have in the class of 60, maybe 10 boys and 50 girls. Sometimes we've had, over the years, we've also had one boy and 59 girls, So you can just imagine when they come to English, the whole ratio changes, But over the years, there have been 15 boys, 20 boys, 25 boys. So again, the boys are coming up. But in other departments, they're doing very well. The boys are doing very well. It's just in certain departments, which I'm used to, that you do see girls coming up. But this is also because of progressive parents.
Absolutely.
Parents who have realized, the girl, it's important to give her education, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
If she doesn't get the family property, also at least educate her. And let her get married. And the choice is that if she doesn't want to marry, also it's fine with the family, because she becomes a bread earner. And I think, as far as women are concerned, Naga women are concerned, it's not that they will still remain backward or, in the dark ages. Not really. But these kind of stories that I'm talking about are about urban, educated classes.
Yes.
What about the 80% of Nagas who live in the villages? The same monotony continues. The same routine of going to the fields, looking after the children, dying at childbirth, no access to good health care. We've had so many mothers on the way to the hospital, delivering, dying. I've been to all parts of Nagaland, to the most interior, been to Burma so many times. And so the kind of poverty that we have seen, on our trips as the Naga Mothers Peace Mission. It's unbelievable how women suffer in rural areas. And I think it is time, if we really care for our women, then the graphs of our progress reports should change. It should change. We should really focus on the rural areas, make sure that education of the girl child is a reality, and that she doesn't become a dropout after class 6 or class 10, and that if she wants to study higher, she stopped saying your brother's education is more important, you get a job. So we still have these kind of systems that are happening, and I think we need to change our mindsets.
And we need to keep questioning that. And
yeah, we have to.
And you mentioned about there was in the beginning miscommunication or communication gap between the menfolk and women. In this kind of in your journey for fighting for the reservation seats reservation for women. Now, looking forward, how would you like to address this kind of communication gap? I don't think you ever came across the table.
Oh, we did.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
And try to reason things out?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
There were several meetings.
Okay.
And finally, there was a big meeting of the tribe leaders and us. This was before we went to withdraw the petition, much before we went to withdraw the petition. And they had no problems with women reservation. Okay? That is the thing people are not understanding.
Okay.
Our men did not have problems with women reservation, but what they wanted was women reservation by nomination, not election.
Okay.
They said, don't come for election, come in as nominees. But we all know what happens in nominations. The ruling government, everyone's favoritism, a lot of issues come in because nomination by itself is actually not democratic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think it goes back to our culture of saying that selection, not election.
True.
And for people like us, we have always been questioning the very idea of selection. Who selects?
Yeah.
So the argument was, why not come in reserve seats as nominees? An argument was, a nominee does not have voting power as per the Municipal Act.
Okay.
And therefore, women, whoever goes in, will definitely want voting power in the municipality if you want to have a voice.
Yes.
And therefore, you have to come in as an elected member. So we did go through the acts and we did go through all these kind of discussions, but we ended up, on a stalemate because we were very adamant that we wanted to have reservation by election as per the law.
Okay.
And they stood for, nomination. And then since then, after we withdrew, we actually, haven't really met as such. Last year, was it last year or the year before, I was put on a committee by the government to look into the municipal elections.
Okay.
The same kind of stories literally emerged again. And therefore, as someone, even though I was not a petitioner, as someone who was, for whom this particular case is very close, I found it difficult. I found it difficult that, if there's no change in mindsets, it is difficult actually to even have a dialogue.
True. Also, it's such a very important and interesting insights that you have given, and we have touched a lot of areas. So I really thank you for this time, and I look forward to having conducting this election very successfully and empower our women in a very, very powerful way. Thank you so much for this time.
Thank you, Longling. I'm glad I came.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
I've been very reluctant for interviews, particularly on this issue. But I think this is the beginning of many, many more to come, So thank you.
Fingers crossed. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.